Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and this is not really a video that I expected to be doing this week. I really thought I was just going to continue to crank out the What's Next videos, and the rest of those are coming, I promise. But this is why I love the NBA, because things for the Brooklyn Nets off season are drastically different today than they were just last week. There was some rumors yesterday and the day before, as of this recording, that they were gaining some momentum with a couple of free agents this off season, specifically Kyrie Irving. And at the time, I didn't really put a ton of stock into them as a Nets fan. I didn't really get or allow myself to get too excited because it wasn't Woj, it wasn't Shams. And so I told myself, just relax. But then this most recent trade with the Atlanta Hawks happened, and I'm now starting to allow myself to get excited just a little bit. Really briefly, I'm going to talk about the trade, review it, talk about what it means, and then I'm going to go through what I believe are four very positive and realistic scenarios for the Brooklyn Nets offseason. So first, let's talk about the trade. The Nets sent Allen Crabbe and the 17th pick in this year's draft, as well as a lottery-protected 2020 first-round pick to the Hawks in exchange for Taurean Prince and a 2021 second-round pick. And the reason this is significant, as I've referenced every single time I've talked about the Nets offseason, whether that be in their What's Next video or the Kyrie Irving video that I just recently did, the first step in the Nets creating two max contract slots this offseason was always dumping Allen Crabbe's $18 million expiring contract. And I always said that it wouldn't be all that difficult to do, and it turns out that they were able to do it before the offseason truly even started. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen things on Twitter talking about how the Nets do have two max cap space slots, and that is kind of true, but it's also not really that simple, as I'm going to talk about in this video. But I'm going to go through all four of these scenarios that are extremely positive, and the Nets have now put themselves in a position and in a situation to have a fantastic offseason, really in any of these options. So the first one, let's just go right for it. Let's just go right for the most ideal scenario for the Nets. First, they would denounce their rights to every single free agent that they have on the roster. That includes D'Angelo Russell, that includes Ed Davis, that includes Rondae Hollis-Jefferson. And once they do that, once they say, we don't want these guys, we don't want their rights anymore, we don't want their cap holds on our salary cap anymore, then they have the space to go out and outright sign two max cap space free agents. And at the moment, that combination seems to be Kyrie Irving, as I said, and potentially Kevin Durant. Now, again, this was always a possibility. This is always something that some people might have seen coming in terms of something that was possible, but now it's something that seems like it might be a little bit more realistic, because apparently the interest between Kyrie Irving and the Brooklyn Nets is very real. And with him, he might also be able to convince Kevin Durant to come to Brooklyn as well, instead of what has been rumored to be his destination for months now, the New York Knicks. So now let's just say that that happens. The Nets open up their two max cap space slots by renouncing the rights to all of their free agents, and they move forward from there. What else happens this offseason? Well, they're actually in a really good position, and this is one of the reasons why they are such an attractive free agency destination, because they still have other really good players on the roster. They have Spencer Dinwiddie under contract through at least the 2020-21 season, and three other really good young guys. Karis LeVert, who's a good scoring guard, Jared Allen, who's a 5-man that can protect the rim and rebound, and then Taurean Prince, who they got back in this deal, who people aren't really talking about, but is a good young player, a wing that needs to work on his defense, but can score the ball relatively well. And all three of those guys are under contract for next season. Although LeVert and Prince will need new contracts next offseason, and Allen will in 2021. And so the path is now there for it to be realistic that the Nets start 2019 with the starting five of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, and Jared Allen, with Spencer Dinwiddie and Joe Harris coming off of the bench as well in their rotation, and all of those guys, with the exception of Harris, being under contract long term. Now, with that, obviously they'd be capped out for the foreseeable future, especially if they brought back those young guys on any kind of significant long-term contracts. They'd definitely be very close to the luxury tax, if not over it. But that would also make it less of a big deal that they gave up a 2020 protected pick, because they would be one of, if not the best team in the East with that roster. But again, this is the most ideal of ideal scenarios, that Kyrie decides to come, and then he also convinces Kevin Durant to as well. Obviously, you miss out on D'Lo. And then the other part of this is potentially an Anthony Davis trade, but that is just even too ideal for me, even as optimistic as I'm feeling about the Nets at the moment. I just don't really think they have the assets to make it work. I don't think they have a high enough draft pick to make it work. So I'm going to stop there and just say that their most ideal scenario would be what I just went over without a AD trade. And now moving on to the second scenario, and in my opinion, this is definitely the most interesting one, and that is that the Nets are able to sign Kyrie Irving outright, but then they also re-sign D'Angelo Russell and they don't get any other max contract players to come to Brooklyn, and then the plan is exactly the same where they go over the cap to re-sign the other young guys on the roster. And the reason this is interesting to me is because the Nets would then roll forward with that being their starting backcourt of D'Angelo Russell and Kyrie Irving, both relatively young, obviously Kyrie being a little bit older than D'Lo, but that would just be a really interesting fit. Two guys that can play on or off the ball, but prefer to play on it and are better when they're playing on the ball. I don't really know how that would work defensively, but apparently it is something the Nets are at least rolling around the idea of if they aren't able to bring in someone like KD, but Kyrie is still interested in coming to Brooklyn. And when I first thought about this, I was like, that would be interesting. Like I kind of would like to see Kyrie and D'Lo play together. I don't know how well it would work. I don't know if they'd be like a championship level team or anything, but it'd be interesting. And then someone asked me on Twitter, they're like, hey, you know, who would you pick? How do you think they're going to fit together? All this stuff. And I was like, wait a second. 3 years ago, our highest scoring guards on the team were Sean Kilpatrick and Jarrett Jack, and now we're talking about potentially having Kyrie or D'Lo or maybe even both, or who would you pick? And it's just a crazy scenario. It's an incredible turnaround for the Nets, but this would still be a really good situation. Like I said, it's not the most ideal, but when you're comparing it to where the Nets have come from over the last couple of years, it would be an outstanding thing to have two really high scoring guards like that. Then you had Prince and Dinwiddie and LeVert and Allen, and you've got the makings of a really good team, and then maybe you move around some of those other pieces to try and get guys that complement the games of D'Lo and Irving a little bit more, as opposed to a little bit more ball dominant scoring type guards that might be a little bit redundant, like LeVert and Dinwiddie, which they obviously already have on the roster. So scenario 2, although it isn't as ideal as rolling into next season with the starting 5 and the bench unit that I talked about in the first scenario, is still a really good one, and in my opinion, probably the most interesting. And then beyond that, we get less and less ideal and less exciting. Scenario 3 would be that the Nets have opened up this cap space, but unfortunately aren't able to sign any of the max contract guys that it seems like they're pretty confident that they're going to be able to get. But again, a reminder that the Knicks did the exact same thing, maybe not in the exact same way, because they traded away a young asset in Kristaps Porzingis to dump salaries and get salary cap space. But it seemed like a couple of months ago, the Knicks were really confident that they were getting somebody, and now suddenly the Nets are really confident that they're getting somebody. So you never really know how this is going to work out. But let's just say the Nets struck out on the max guys. Scenario 3 would be them bringing in someone like potentially Tobias Harris on a big contract, players like that, younger players that kind of fit with what they want to do moving forward, but they still want to start to try and be pretty good because they're giving up these picks. It doesn't really help them to be bad next year, again, because they're giving up picks, even though the pick is protected. This trade doesn't really give off the vibe of a team that's really planning long-term anymore, and they're really trying to cash in on what they have right now. So that wouldn't be a bad option either. I mean, you'd have D'Lo and Tobias Harris and the young guys that I talked about, and that's probably a 5 or 4 seed in the East, depending on how things shake out in free agency. So that would still be a good scenario. And then the last option would be that they don't spend any of this money except on bringing back D'Angelo Russell, and that wouldn't be ideal because you'd probably want to spend all this money in the year immediately prior to Prince and LeVert becoming free agents and 2 years prior to Allen becoming a free agent. But again, they still wouldn't be in a bad spot. It was a 6th seed in the playoffs and still has a very good future, even just with the guys that they have under contract moving forward, or will have under contract if they bring back D'Lo. And then they've got some moves to be able to make in free agency, maybe for not guys like Tobias Harris or a max player, but just more complementary options, and continue to try and build a little bit slower than if they got, you know, scenario 1 or 2. But in the end, like, these are all still really, really good options. I mean, 4 obviously isn't as ideal, but the Nets have put themselves in a fantastic position to take a huge to moderately huge step forward this offseason. And this is the first time that I've really allowed myself to think, hey, we might actually end up with a max free agent, or we might actually end up with 2 max free agents this offseason and be something truly, truly competitive next season, maybe even a championship caliber team in scenario 1. And it's just so crazy to think about the fact that, you know, like I said, 3 years ago, this team was just throwing out awful lineups. And Sean Marks and Kenny Atkinson showed up and did an awesome job, dug them out of this hole that Billy King put them in. And now they have an opportunity to really be one of the best teams in the East, and it's just a crazy turnaround. But I'm not getting my hopes up. I still am being cautiously optimistic as opposed to over the moon about these rumors and about this trade, because things can always change. Like I said, the Knicks apparently felt confident enough to trade away Kristaps Porzingis for cap space earlier in the season. So these kinds of trades don't necessarily mean that they know that a free agent is going to be on the way, so things could still fall apart. They could still end up with nobody this offseason, and even if they did get those guys, like this team has a history of letting me down, so I'm not going to get my hopes up at all. But it's just really interesting to see how this trade impacts them moving forward. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.